Hello. My name is Yasmin Tatiana. I just recently wrote a book called Chainbreaker that released in August. This is available to purchase on Amazon, or you can contact me directly for a signed copy. I would love to read my book to you. I'm going to do it chapter by chapter. And this is Chainbreaker, Book 1 of the Tyrant Queen trilogy by Yasmin Tatiana. I designed this super cool map. Let's see if I can make sure to get enough light on it. That kind of encompasses the part of the continent that the main character travels through. I'm pretty sure I have this map up on my Instagram. If not, I'll add it, but you can always take a look and check that out there too. Prologue, which I will include with chapter 1. Magic is as old as the spoken word. The first creature that could utter more than meaningless babble to itself held the power. It courses through the earth, a nervous system for all life, blessed by ancient entities that now sleep, forgotten by those who built the world around them. Only a few cultures held on to their prophecies, clutching to the words of dead gods. Foretold is the day the courts collapse, the air end is nigh, be it with thunderclaps or the whisper of a wave. Nations quiver to the raised hand of an innate caster with the taboo brand born of night and dawn. Contracts of the land will break and split, darkness boils up and lays the first brick for the reign of races to fall. Just as twilight fades, the stars will not rise, a new world will burn into demise at the hands of a child. The Fae did not have offspring, and those that did observed the culling of the children born with the marks of magic outlawed. A regulation was placed on all those who were attuned to the arts after the oracles wrote these condemning words in blood and sigil. Poor creatures that would never open their eyes to see the shining sun would only ever take a few breaths before being laid to rest in a bed of ash and rosemary. Not all young were caught, some were brought into this life in secret. It is said that one such creature came writhing into this world. The north wind blew in off the ocean, cold and stormy, sweeping through the marble castle into the room of a queen. Her fragile figure, still bent from exhaustion, slicked in sweat and blood. The beastly child screamed in her arms, so unbearably new to a world that demanded its tithe to be paid. Within the wind, a specter appeared to the woman and her wet nurse. It hushed the wailing child with a soft hand and lifted it from the mother. She pleaded and then screamed at the specter, dragging in its raiment in weakened fury. Her words did nothing, her strength too weak. It took the poor wretched thing into its arms and wrapped it in a cloak of stars. In a breath, it was gone again. Across the realm, the countryside fell into an eerie silence. A font of shadow peeled apart the air, and the specter appeared. Only the sound of hoofbeats sundered the still night. The shroud of darkness and mystery fell off of him and his steed until he was just a man on horseback. The sound of crickets returned, the nightlife twittering up as if the lull had never happened. Just before daybreak, the mist still clinging to the dew, he would slow his mad race. The church bells hadn't rung yet, and the matrons of the plain steeple had not risen. He cradled the sleeping babe in his arms, taking a tender moment to kiss it gently on the forehead. He then laid a bundle of night and star at the doorstep. As dawn began to lighten the sky, the man pulled himself away and back to his horse. He left as quickly as he had come. The ringing of the early morning bells was followed by the weak cries of a small child. The matrons opened the door to the poor bundle and brought it inside. There was no note, nor a name left with the abandoned thing. The warden of the other children hung her head in frustration and despair, for the creature turned into her care. It was a sheep among wolves, and she had no hope it would survive. But it did. Book 1, Chapter 1. The stagnant mud slurps at my leg as I adjust my sitting position. The sounds of shouting, revelry, confrontation, lamentation are my atmosphere now. The gray landscape is darkening. The lights of the main camp are a distant glow, and our cages are posted outside in the muck. A man had drowned in the mud the day before. He had fallen asleep and slipped under. He suffocated before any of us noticed. They now come for the man's body. My eyes dart to the open cell, the rotten iron metal chipped at its frame. The hulk of a man was too busy unfastening the dead from his chains to notice the wide opening, or he was too confident in his reasoning. I couldn't tell. It didn't matter to me. He, like the rest, had thick coats of fur and elongated muzzles, with broken teeth reaching up past sagging black lips. They were all vastly different races of different amalgamations of animal, but they all had one name I had come to know, Theshkar, or as the prisoners called them, the beast folk. We are shackled down in the 6 inches of mud. I work at my wrist behind my back, the metal biting and agitating the skin. The mud, a gritty soup I use as a lubricant to work the metal past my knuckles. It takes skin with it, burning in the decay and ruin of our quarters. I hardly breathe the moments both wrists are free, shooting up past the bull-like man. Something clatters behind me, followed by a bellowing roar. Gevrak! Deshit Gevrak! Gevrak is what they call us. I have little understanding other than that. I sprint, the mud sucking and popping around me with each labored step. It is like running through molasses. The call for aid is quickly answered. 2 more horned men, barrel-chested with deep rutting scars in their hide, run at me, arms open. I veer to the left, toppling over into the mud. I recover, running on my hands and legs to pull myself from the mire. I know that there is dry land, and the tents were pitched on it. If I could just reach it, I could run out of here. My heart pounds in my chest as fear and adrenaline cocktail inside of me. My stomach sinks with it all as the air is suddenly knocked from my lungs. The blow knocks me from my feet and into the mud. I slide until I hit another cage, and the metal ringing. I look up through blurry vision as one of the beastmen grips my head and lifts me like a rabbit. I weep without my control, scratching at his clawed fingers and trying to bite the callous skin. Gevrak da Shabir, he growls back. Ev beer. The yarn is word rumbling through his chest. I can feel it in his hands. He then laughs, spittle flying in my face. He then lowers me, but doesn't let me go, and instead turns with his companion, dragging me back through the mud to the cage I had been in. I kick and scream at him futilely. I run out of energy quickly, like a candle flickering out after all the wax has poured off. He tosses me like a rag doll into the cage. The door slams shut. I go back and shake the bars of the door, screaming and crying, until again I have nothing left. I slump into the mud. It welcomes me back with a squelch. I look back, my cage full of other unremarkable and nameless faces watching me tentatively. We had all watched as other prisoners had been crushed, snuffed out, and beaten to death for what I had just done. We all know I am a lucky one. Eventually another guard comes, opening the door and snatching me up like a mouse. This one is wolf-like, ears twitching as it worked. I couldn't tell through the fur, but I thought maybe it was female. Their red-brown coat is caked with mud and disheveled like the rest I had seen, wearing scraps of leather and carapace. They dragged me back to the perimeter of the cage, this time roughly tying leather-bound ropes around my wrist, tight enough that they almost cut off the circulation to my hands. I would have to break my bones to escape this time. A second band is then buckled around my neck and fastened to the upper bars of the cage. I am collared. The wolf appraises their work, snorts, and leaves. My anger is a bottomless well. I grip the collar and scream at their back. The only response is the ringing of the door as it slams and locks. I thrash against my bonds, trying to climb the lead, but everything is too muddy. My energy wilts. I kneel in the mud, feeling sorry for myself, my throat burning and my muscles. Quietness passes over us. Someone is coughing nearby. The cages spread apart and we can see each other through the bars, but we have to shout to speak if we choose to do so. When heard, we are rapped with a heavy wooden baton from one of the guards. I've been here for days. My cellmates have I have been here for days, my cellmates having survived much longer than me. They watch me like they watch the guards assessing my level of danger. The night wears on, and the humidity and temperature drops. The mud becomes freezing and stiff. The others gather together to keep each other warm. I shiver alone in the dark. I believe they expect I'll be dead in the morning. Morning comes. My body is stiff and in pain, but I am alive. I breathe in as I wake, the smell of burning flesh and feces filling my nostrils. I gag and retch, nothing up. The others look at me. If they are surprised, they don't show it. I spend the day and the next, and then the next, in suspended silence. Time passes slowly, the occasional prisoner being beaten or dragged out of the cage, the only source of action I see. I'm sure it's only been a week, but I can't tell anymore. I feel delirious and my fingers are constantly numb. I've lost track of the time I've been here, days maybe. It doesn't matter. My desire to live is a sliver I don't understand. I have nothing. I had nothing before this. No one would come after me here. Doesn't matter, but against my better judgment, I try anyway. I use my voice for the first time for something that isn't screaming, and it sounds foreign to me. Hey, do any of you speak my language? I ask. A whisper in the stale air. They all look up and blink. Some narrow their eyes, others look away, and one of the men glances at the others and back to me. Most of us speak Southern Common Tongue. I relaxed with a sigh of relief. If you can sit with me when the air gets cold, I will give you a portion of my meal. Please, I need some warmth. She is Palu. Another man issued the sound like a warning. I don't know what Palu means. Please, I am begging you, part of my food for warmth, I ask again, gruffly, my throat aching. The man I am speaking to looks between his group and the others, compassion and hunger flickering in his eyes. He makes a face like he might regret his actions, but he nods. He turned back to me and nods with more emphasis. You have not died yet. You are stronger than you look. He stands up, thin, papery legs keeping him upright, dripping with mud. His clothing hangs loosely on his sagging frame. He fishes for his chain and drags it along the lead line and around the cage towards me. He sits beside me and wraps an arm around me. I could have cried again with the familiar sensation of skin next to mine, the warmth radiating off of him. It didn't matter that he was a stranger. The man at the other side of the cage repeats himself more intensely. She is Paulu. She will be the death of you. I closed my eyes to it all, and I doze on the warm shoulder. The day would wear on. Meals are delivered at some ambiguous time in what I assumed was the afternoon, wrapped in leaves for us. It was like a loaf of bread, hard and stale that they soak in something so it can be broken off and eaten. I split my meager meal with my new friend, adding to his plate. The others look at him with mild jealousy and worry. He scarfs it down, including the leaves. There's more like that if you stay here with me, I say. He looks at me, eyes flickering back and forth across my face like he is reading me. My name is Farrell. He nods once and relaxes again back against the bars of our dwelling. Nim. It felt almost blasphemous to use my name after losing everything I had been. I have nothing else but the name Nimora, I guess is my name. Well, Nim, he tests the name in his mouth. Here's to keeping each other warm till one of us dies or is taken away. Where do they go? I ask, in regard to those taken away. He just shrugs at my question. I look at the rows of welded iron walls and the city of tents beyond it, the guards walking circles, bored to be stalking between the quiet cages of humans. They never look the same, rotating in shifts, save a few regulars. We have no idea why some prisoners are taken and others are beaten. Our first night is spent shivering together without the warmth of the others. Farrell seems to struggle, but he keeps me warm throughout the night as per our agreement. The warmth keeps the edge off of my delirium. This partnership gives me a flicker of hope that dwells in my chest when the gray sky begins to brighten again. I've seen a lot of women come and go, their bodies given before the beasts get to them, he says thoughtfully. We sit back, watching the insects crawl across the surface of the mud. You are not like many women. I think about that statement. I don't think it's because I am a woman. I've been in many prisons before. I have been close to death before. I have not died yet, and I have escaped from all of my prisons. I do not expect to die here, I say. I can feel his head bob as he nods at my statement. Hope is both a terrible and wonderful thing. It burns in my chest like something I should be terrified of. Hours pass, and we are given our meal. I share Farrell's portion with him and slowly eat mine. He watches me carefully, slowly eating his down as he does so. Palu means trouble, sort of. Like a bad omen or a trick of the light. They don't like that you fight the guards or try to flee, he says thoughtfully, savoring the last bite. I glance over at them, their backs to us. That's fine. I know many that think I am a bad omen. I glance over at them, their backs. Oh, I just read that. He tilts his head, the seed of curiosity planted. He leaves it alone, though, thoughtfully cultivating it. As the days pass, we speak little over the single meal. A day we are provided. The single meal a day we are provided, and spend the rest of the daylight napping against each other, holding on to the warmth that we provide. It is always overcast here, and the distant roar of creatures cheering for one thing or another never ending. It is the chorus into the night, drowning out the drone of insects, only quieting before morning and beginning again. The sounds come in waves sometimes, a unanimous roar of glee over something. It begins to blend into the background. Instead, I begin to listen to the sparse conversation, straining my ears to hear, willing myself to change to a shape I'll never know again. The lack of magic in my body leaves a chasm in my chest. I pity myself. I hate it. Anger replaces the grief. I'd rend my captors to pieces if I could. I'm at their mercy instead. I lean against the bars, straining to hear anything familiar. They all speak in other languages. I can't make heads or tails of anything. No one speaks the common tongue except for the prisoners, and I cannot decide whether it is out of fear or ignorance of it. There is a night when 3 guards, arms wrapped around each other's shoulders and waists in camaraderie, drunkenly slosh through the mud. The sound of a baton clack, clack, clacking against the iron bars across our row. I can see them in the dim torchlight, backs to us. I wake, Farrell peeking over his shoulder at the men together. Birgrak, Gebrak Eshdomen, ye. I recognized the words I had been called, a shudder traveling over my skin. I slink down into the mud, not knowing if it was indeed me they were looking for. I can't take a chance. My imagination runs wild with panic-inducing ideas. Farrell groggily looks between me and the men. I push my fingers to my lips and sink even lower until I am lying on my belly, collared tightly trying to hold me upward. I coat myself in more mud, hoping that I am invisible to them. They turn to investigate our cage, clattering the baton against the bars. I feel Farrell tense next to me. They ask again to the darkness. I close my eyes and hold my breath. With a frustrated grunt, they move along. I wait until Farrell taps my shoulder before rising and shivering, the mud freezing to my skin. For all I try, I cannot sleep the rest of the night. Farrell stirs and wakes once the sky has lightened. I wonder if he can sleep through anything. Maybe I am Palu here. I whisper. The dawn only dries the mud, not warming me from it. He shrugs. Maybe you are. You're not dead yet. I'm not dead yet, so it doesn't matter, he offers a skeletal smile. We sit huddling together for food. We eat slowly now. Farrell gratefully welcomes the half of the bread I give him with a small bow. Farrell speaks up, distracting himself from eating too fast. I used to make this bread with my tribe, I think. I look at my piece, turning it over in my hands, small flecks of seed and anonymous debris. He continued, I've been thinking I'm likely the last of my people. I've not seen a face I know in weeks. His shoulders sag as he looks out over the gray mud pit. What else did you do with your tribe? I ask, to keep the conversation going. He tilts his head. I was Shesk, a storyteller for the people. More of a story collector. We sat in silence again, a commotion down the road drawing our attention. Four massive bullmen dragged the door open. Screams and pleas bubble up from the cell down the way. I watch as the neighboring prisoners look away, but in that anywhere but in that direction. The people in the cage are dragged out into the mud, their chains gathered in the hands of the bullmen. They are dragged back through the rows on their feet or their backs in various states of panic, taken towards the tent city. Farrell and I look at each other. I turn my back to the outside world. I took a deep breath, forcing the fear back down into my stomach. I remind myself that I am okay. Once there was a time that I would have shouted and fought for any kind of injustice. This sits bitterly in my chest. I am okay. Farrell looks antsy. He rubs his arms, the mud breaking off in chunks from his sleeves. So you mentioned you were in prison before. Is that how you got here? I wonder if he's filling our silence or if he genuinely wants to know. I've given up on trying to remove the mud from my skin and shake my head. Not in the way that you mean. You could say I'm naturally drawn to trouble. I can't help the bitter tone out of my voice. I can't keep the bitter tone out of my voice. They captured me as I wandered the plains. Bad luck, I suppose. A long history of bad luck. Farrell picks at his nails. Sounds like a story I'd very much like to hear. I close my eyes to years of memories and search for the beginning. Do you want the long story or the short one? I asked. He chuckles mirthlessly. I don't see us going anywhere. I could use a good long story. I don't remember wanting something so bad as a kid as I did wanting to get my hands on a couple of magic books. I never had anything of my own. I was a waif of a child sleeping in boxes and small hiding holes in the labyrinth of a city. I stole what I needed to eat, but the concept and rumors of magic gave me something more to sustain myself. Back then, I was nobody, nameless and forgettable, just another dirty face in the crowd. The city whispers, idle minds gossiping between tasks. What they talked about was impossible and exactly what I wanted, these magic books. The story began to change, more rumors filling in the gaps. The longer I listened, the more I knew I would have to go. Where I would have to go. The rat, the shadow in the night that had stolen the books, or tried to. The story was never clear. I found him, or he found me rather, and I began to work for him, clearing the air of gossip and misleading hearsay I had heard. One book had been stolen. 2 known books were in the possession of the Duke that governed Helm. The rat's facade was constructed by a man named Theodore. He was a delightful, charming, theatrical man who filled my head with ideas of a better time. I was young enough to trust anyone, old enough to be cautious, but in this case, not cautious enough. Almost as much as I wanted the books, I wanted to be a part of something. I was housed under Theodore's care with a boy just older than me, Lance. My first few days of residency were a whirlwind of information, mostly about what I had gathered over Theodore. He came about mid-morning each day and was served a hard-boiled egg with salt and a slice of ham before he'd pour out his bag of books. It was clockwork, just like the contents of the books and what plans we pored over changed. He'd leave early in the morning, just as Lance started dinner. He'd leave early in the evening, just as Lance started dinner. Theodore's personality bled over, or maybe it was the rats that bled into him. He acted and talked big, like a character on a stage reenacting some performance. He'd toss his hair back and throw his arms out to proclaim something new. His movements were graceful, but excessive. He talked endlessly, whether or not it was important, and he seemed to stress words that I struggled to understand. I also found that he was patient. Even in the chaos of his theatrics, he made sure to show me how to read the maps and understand the information we were going over. Theo threw a fuss when he learned I couldn't read, and despite Lance fussing just as much about teaching me, I was set to learn how. I was given maps to redraw, so we had copies of the city, multiple estates, and guild houses. I was given books to read about the city, though these were slow and tedious. We talked about the books we were stealing and how it would be done. I was taught how the two correlated. I talked about the rumors that would need to be fostered. Oh, we talked about the rumors that would need to be fostered, cultivated, and grown. I learned the art of a lie and how to dress it in truth. Lance patiently taught me until I could do it on my own. We'd visit pack shops crying about how terrified of the rat we were, where we had seen him last, and rumors we had heard. It was like a living and breathing thing. The power of good gossip was the first power I held in my hands. Everything was for Theodore and what he wanted to accomplish, which included telling the difference between the forks on a table, how to fold napkins and linen, how to press my clothing, and how I was supposed to stand, sit, and talk. I was drilled into the patterns and schedules to which the nobility of Helm kept both their servant and their children. I was to know the primary nobility of the city. Beyond that, I was exempt. Lance would make dinner and show me how to use the stove properly and how to at least start rice or oatmeal while he began the rest of the dishes. We would slowly begin to laugh and joke together. He was an easy friend to make. He didn't care about my strange habits or the spells of quietness I'd stew in. We'd eat heartily and go over a few words in the books before saying goodnight. I'd slump into bed at the end of the day, well worked and tired. It's hard to admit, but I fell in love with my found family, the first small community I'd grown with. I looked up to Lance and the quiet nights we had, where he would take an hour or two to show me words and how they were written or printed. I admired Theodore for his bravado and bravery, for the work he did. He was a real hero to me, more real than the rat was. The bleak autumn quickly moved into a darker, bleaker winter. The earth was chilled and an overcast sky hung around us for days and days. People were sparse in the streets, and too often we saw the same faces. I woke in a particularly cold room. I pulled my coat on and stepped out of my bedroom, greeted by warmth. Theodore bustled past me, teetering down a hallway. I rubbed my eyes and yawned. He was over very early. Your gown is finished. It's awfully simple, but it'll have to do. Theodore pushed a bundle of fabric into my arms. Go, hang it in your closet, he said as he moved in the opposite direction. Books and teacups threatening to topple over. I thought I had washed those the day before. I stared at the bundle. We had ordered clothing to fit the part, and I expected that must be it. I followed up with a shrug and sleepily moved into the study to investigate the dress wrapped in muslin. It was a dark gray blue fabric, a subtle pattern in the floor-length skirt. The body of the dress was rigid, and it felt awfully heavy and looked just as immobile. Does it look like it might fit? Of course it does. It's trusted work, after all. I jumped a little as Theodore strutted back into the room on his long legs, followed by Lance, holding a tray with steaming cups of coffee for us. I nodded, but it wasn't good enough. He sent me back to his room to change and try it on. You look excellent. Terribly feminine, he chuckled. You'll be a heartbreaker on the streets, I'm sure. Now hurry and change out of that. Today is not a day for gowns. It's time to put your skills to good use. The Duke is throwing a party at his estate over the weekend, as he's wont to do, and we need to be there. I need a steward for the evening, and you would be perfect. My family knows Lance too well. He looked excited and hopeful. I had been thinking. I was also tired, and my ability to dress a sentence fell short. On one condition, I said, folding my arms and leaning against the doorway, trying to look bigger than I was. It was comical. I barely stood at the height of his shoulder. He narrowed his eyes at me. I don't think you get conditions. I won't do it. I paused, watching his expression arch. Not until I know why we are doing this. You've been wonderfully kind to me, but you haven't told me why. I have to know the truth before I can lie about it. Yes, all good lies are wrapped in small truths. He rolled his eyes. But his expression became a little more stern. I could see the debate, the choice of words on his tongue. He'd cross his legs and unfold his arms before beginning. Do you know why there's no magic here? I shook my head. No one else does either. I've met with the city's scholars. Those that would talk about it knew very little. I recently found out that our Duke, Abel Gaston, dabbled in a similar arcane curiosity. He shared these tomes with me and others and talked about how he wishes to set this space free to release whatever is blocking the magic. Why would there be magic all over the world and none here? There must be a reason. With all the corruption Abel has built the small empire on, we're a tinderbox. Whatever is behind those doors could be our disaster. He took a deep breath and smoothed his wild hair. I could see the frustration in his eyes. I need to know why, too. But more importantly, we need to expose him for this. Petition the king to have his title removed. Something. His words moved, but they brought up a wealth of questions that would need answering. I tapped my chin. What do you mean something's blocking magic? He raised his eyebrows, surprised that I had even asked in the first place. Magic is very common outside of this province, but there's nothing here, nothing at all. Items losing their enchantment, wizards can't perform simple tasks. Most of the people that spend an entire lifetime in this city have no idea. Wouldn't performing magic or having these tomes just not work? I asked. He nodded. One would think that was the case, but even so, the books still emanate an energy. I do not know how it works, but take a look. Moved across the room to a chest. He unlocked it and pulled the lid up. Lance huddled behind me, peeking over his shoulder. I could feel it when he opened it, like a breath of fresh air or something warm in my chest. The tome was made of dark purple leather, stones embedded in its exterior, and gold leafing bordered the edges and ridges of the book. It pulsed. I had spent my entire childhood pining after a moment like this, obsessively drawn to folk tales and travelers discussing wonders of magic outside of the protected valley. Something welled in my chest, accompanied by an intense greed to lay my hands on the book and run until I had nothing left to keep me going. Theodore snapped the chest closed and replaced the lock on it. I tried to peel my eyes away from it and back to him. "You'll do the work?" He asked before I had to say something. I nodded again. "So be it. You'll come with me to my family's estate and assist me in my preparation. When we have arrived at the Duke's mansion, you will then do some snooping to find the other tome. I believe you know the maps well enough to poke through the study and libraries for more information. Be sure to comb your hair. You need to be dressed and ready within the hour." "Within the hour," I repeated, coughing on my morning tea. "Today?" Did I stutter? "Go, get dressed," he snapped and clapped his hands. "Chop, chop." While I dressed, Theodore rattled off the information about his family. I buttoned up my shirt to the names of his uncles and aunts and their children. I fastened my vest as he spoke of his mother's many unmentionable affairs with men, that his father did the same, that the gentleman of the city was soft towards gambling while his family abstained from the act. It did not spare a few risk-taking endeavors. Once I was dressed and combed, I opened the door. My cuffs were turned just right with the correct cuff length. Lance fixed my collar and closed the door behind us. Theodore's carriage would take us to the nicer part of the city, where instead of apartments tightly built together, sprawling estates opened with courtyards that horses could prance freely in. The snow-covered gardens gave an idea of what would have been illustrious. It glared and sparkled beneath the cobalt blue sky, briefly clear for the morning and a reprieve to the storm we had throughout the night. When we stopped, I moved to open the carriage door for Theodore, bowing my head as I had learned, as he stepped down and out of the carriage. His welcoming was hardly gallant. He had warned that his family may be there to meet him, but they were not. He stalked briskly across the frigid walkway and up the stairs to a beautiful ivory home. I did not have the time to admire the craftsmanship as I trailed behind him. The doors were flung open with a flare of drama, the doorman stumbling to catch up with the elite gentleman. I kept my smirk to myself at his acting. He was so much more over the top when he was in public. There was an excited shout from the top of the stairs, and I glanced up just long enough to see a beautiful blonde girl almost fly down the steps. Theodore's expression lit up as he saw and caught her before he even touched the floor. He spun her around in a fierce hug, her blonde ringlets and petticoats a flurry among the blue lace. He'd set her delicately back down and gave her nose a pinch. "Theobert, I can't believe you still do that. I missed you. Did you bring me a book from the marketplace?" She danced taking his hands and spinning beneath it like a small doll. He'd take her other hand and dance her around the front room, lifting her when she couldn't keep up with his long steps. Of course I did. He'd slow down and daintily let go of her to reach into the folds of his coat, handing her a small, finely made book. It was one of the ones from the mantelpiece in his apartment. I hope you enjoy it. This one has pirates in it. He'd growl at her, and she'd squeal and laugh, pressing her hands to her lips in excitement. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. She wrapped her arms around Theodore and gave him a squeeze. Oh, Mama said not to be late and that she's in the parlor, but the tailor is waiting for you upstairs. Theodore snorted and shook his head, pulling away from the girl, who assumed could only be family. You can tell her that I'll see her for tea then. Mother can wait. My new frock can't. His antics made the young girl snort and laugh. He'd strut around like a cockatoo for just a moment before pushing her along and then heading up the stairs. The gentle wave of his hand was an indication that I would follow. I took note of the doors leading to various rooms. I knew the map to this house just as well as I knew Garston's. We winded through the second level, the hallway opening a doorless parlor. I glanced over the open courtyards and the other sprawling developments visible beyond the snowy archways. I knocked on the door. Theo suggested and responded, "The young Lord Theodore Vasilis has arrived for his fitting." I glanced up, receiving a wink from Theo. I opened the door to the tailor that was waiting for us. The preparation Theodore took was long-winded, and he seemed about as bored as I did with it. The tailor took his time in making sure Theodore was well put together, and I stood beside the door trying not to fidget. I'd fill my head with the plans for the Duke's estate. I had studied the floors extensively, and I could almost walk them without even having seen the interior of his home. Just as Theodore was being dusted off, the ornate door cracked, and his sister poked her head through, eyes closed until he cleared his throat. "I'm decent, Annis. Stop making faces." She groaned as he stepped in, lightly swaying side to side before finding a comfortable place to drop into, her petticoats ruffling around her like flower petals. She is beautiful by the standards of the city, with dark skin and bright eyes like her brother. They even had the same shade of gray-blue. She pouted and made eye contact with me, making a face. I looked at my feet and pretended to be invisible again. "You are absolutely no fun, Theodore. You put on that drab costume and all of a sudden you're someone important. Too important for me." "Nothing is more important than you. Why do you think I keep coming back?" She giggled and grinned at him, leaning back, curls spilling over her lace. Theodore stepped away from the tailor and to her side to offer an arm. She reached up and pulled herself back off the plush cushions. I followed behind them as the two swept out of the room. "Your new assistant is just a riot. I've never seen one so shy." Theodore just laughed. "How observant you are, my dear." He'd reach across and tap her nose to add to his point. "Now, where is Mother gotten herself?" They would meet for afternoon tea in the parlor. Theodore's mother was a fairy tale dream, but with the personality of a wasp. She was stunning, but all she ever did was complain about the other noble families. I ended up tuning her out, watching the sky darken with threatening clouds. I ran through the plan, heavy in thought and glad to be given a reprieve from the overwhelming information that was casually pushed across the table. A pair of crows broke the dim and dismal sky. I looked back as Theodore beckoned me to the table and asked that I clear it. He engaged in further conversation with his mother, who seemed to be back on the rumors of the rat. I kept my smirk tucked away. The rest of the afternoon was spent studying. I trailed Theodore like a shadow, and sometimes I'd catch him glancing up and nodding at me like he had forgotten I was still there. The few hours of downtime passed slowly, and I made myself useful by reading the backs of all the books. Lance had been teaching me to read, and I picked apart the words while I stood there, but then the time would come when I would be hurried along to escort Theodore. I waited for him down the stairs as he gathered himself. He and his sister, followed by his mother, graced the steps. Myself and the other servants stood quietly with our eyes cast down, and we would follow them out into the chill of a blustery night. The lights hung like ghosts above the carriages. Our charges were bundled in their furs until they made it into their cart. I adjusted my gloves and my own coat before stepping up onto the small handle to hold on to the exterior as the driver took us into the night. snow swirling madly in the darkness around us. All I could hear was the rush of wind and the clop of horse hooves. The winter had bitten through my clothing, and I was shivering when the lights of the Duke's estate began to give life to the snowstorm. The cart rolled to a stop, and I let go of the metal, quickly opening up the carriage door to let Theodore and his family out. The horses were whisked away by footmen, and I escorted the three of them up to the steps and through the doors where their coats could be taken, and they were welcomed into the warmth of a busy social event. The women were gone in moments. Annis welcomed into the fray by friends. Her mother was much more suave as she vanished. It was just Theodore, adjusting the objects in his pockets. He looked at me and nodded. He left the foyer, and I followed. The Duke's estate was by far the most glamorous place I had ever been in. It looked like even the trim on the walls were finely detailed. I kept my eyes on Theodore so as not to get distracted, but I couldn't help but notice, despite the traffic, there was still a reflection in the marble floors. We stepped through a pair of heavy oak doors. The scent of tobacco and cologne was a fog in the air. I noted the carpeted floors were plush and comfortable to stand on. The gentleman's lounge was brimming with men in brocade and jacquard suits and dampened colors. Most of them had pipes hanging from their mouths, pouring over card tables or dice tables. Servants bounced around from table to table, keeping the men in the room lacquered in alcohol and cigars. I assumed a place against the wall to watch while Theodore was greeted by several men in clean coats and vests. One offered him a pipe, which he took readily. No one batted a lash at my androgynous clothing. I was just another servant in the flow of the working class. I watched him melt in like a charismatic chameleon with the rest of them. The younger nobles and elite would gravitate towards him. Conversations paused to listen to his boisterous laughter, and I noted that some of the older men watched him with fleeting interest. He seemed to thrive in the social situations where my heart raced, and I did my best to remain invisible. I listened to the conversations around me instead, searching for any kind of information that may allude to the Duke's dealings or the dealings of the city. I listened to market numbers, and men laughed over the stock of products that were being shipped into the city. A few men talked over the state of travel outside. There was concern about falling numbers and the occasional indulgence in a woman's reputation. There was nothing of magic or the bizarre. There were no hushed conversations or men hunched over in corners, and as I thought about it, I did not even see the Duke among the men. One of the tables beside me laughed uproariously, and I moved to another place in the room to look useful, always keeping an eye on Theodore. As I moved, I caught muffled rumors about the rat. I went slowly to clear their table of their empty glasses, curious to hear how much more his rumor had changed. I heard he was targeting some of the well-to-do merchants. The other man pushed the spectacles into his wrinkled nose. The old man was colorless with The second man was colorless with drooping brows. Valdemir, you think Gildan may have had a run-in with that ruffian? Maybe that's why he left town for a time. Anyways, they are saying he's planning something. The consensus is that it has to do with the guild. A man with narrow, tight lips responded, his voice keening and tight. Damn city's going to hell with this, Valdemir cursed and waved a hand to shoo me. My glasses clinked, and I brought them to the bar as Theodore made eye contact with me and nodded me back to him. Bring me my cigarettes and a drink. Theo didn't smoke cigarettes, only pipe tobacco. It was my cue. I brought him the drink and apologized for the cigarettes. He dismissed me haughtily, and then I was free. I left the warm din of the gentleman's lounge. The rest of the party was more crisp, the music boisterous, and multicolored gowns swished on the dance floor. Straight back, as other servants had been, I walked along the outer perimeter of the grand hall and up the staircase in the foyer to the second and then the third floor. I had memorized the maps that Theodore kept in his desk, and my heart raced as I proudly and purposefully walked down the hall, just as any other steward might. I turned down a hall that led me almost immediately from the sound of the party, dulling it to a small rumble beneath my feet. I walked down and took a right, heading further into the estate's private halls. The office was supposed to be just around the corner. It was marked by large oaken doors carved with elegant curves and ridges. The handles were set with abalone, and I wondered what small fortune had been spent on them, and if I could get away with stealing the handle's tool. I tried to put that out of my mind. I had better things to look for. I slipped into the office that I was mostly certain belonged to Duke Garston, silently, just as the estate's security turned the corner. The door closed with a whisper, and I sat, my heart thudding in my ears as the man's steps came and then passed. I breathed out, quickly turning back to the office. I could feel the pride the door had stored in here. Objects of importance were displayed in glass casings. The office was set up neatly, hardly a hair out of place. Even the parchment on the desk was stacked corner to corner. I wanted to make a mess, but the impulse made my hands twitch. I reminded myself again there was a greater good than the casual destruction of well put together things. I started to pick through his belongings, searching for anything that would indicate magic. I peeked in drawers, shelves, beneath the desk, and even beside the window, but I found nothing. I froze as the guard passed around again, the heel of his boot clicking in the hall. It slowed this time, and the hand of the door turned. My freeze turned to action, and I slid behind the desk just as light knifed across the carpet. I listened, and all I could hear was my heart again. The door remained for a moment and then closed. I stayed where I was in case there had been a trap and there was someone in the room. I heard nothing else as my heart slowed its race. Slowly peeked around to see nothing before relaxing on the plush floor. I rolled onto my back to think, and that's when I saw it. A hook and a cord to a well-defined panel. Theodore's prints hadn't noted anything about a loft. I sat up and moved beneath it. Indeed, there was an impression in the carpet where a ladder must have come down often enough. I reached for the cord that was looped behind a small lip on the shelf. I debated on the sound it would make, and listened to the passing guard again. I glanced up, momentarily torn before I gave a gentle yank. The panel opened and the ladder unfolded suddenly. I caught it before any clatter could be heard, wincing as it came down on me. I set it on the carpet and scrambled up the rungs. I pulled a cord once I got to the top that pulled the ladder and panel back into place, plunging me into thicker darkness. A shiver ran up my spine as I settled into the dark. There was no light, not at least that I could tell. I pulled from my pocket a box of matches and lit one up to get a better idea of my surroundings. I found myself in a cramped study, books stacked on either side of a narrow walkway. The room was full of dust except the winding path between the books. It was well worn into the wood, and I was sure of my answer at the end. My match went, and I felt my way carefully around. My eyes adjusted just enough that I could see vague shades of darkness. I nearly toppled a pile of books and scrambled to keep the teetering pile from collapsing. I reached the end and what I assumed to be when I bumped into a chair. Then I lit another match to shed light on a desk, books, and small metal lamp. I hurried to it, putting the end of my match to good use. The lamp shed light on the nook that had been reserved for one thing in particularly. I leaned over the paperwork. Most of the words looked normal, but there were several areas of another script, flowing and artful. I'd never seen magic of any kind, but I'd also never seen this, and something told me it was the same. I reached out to move the papers around on the table and nearly dropped my lamp as a shock traveled up my fingertips. I peeked under the paperwork to find what I was looking for. My heart hopped a little, and I tentatively reached out again, the same zing making the hair stand out on the back of my neck. A medium leather-bound gold leaf lettering almost rippled in the dim, flickering light. I flipped the cover over just to make sure it contained the symbols and ancient writing that I couldn't understand. My chest felt like it might expand with excitement and the hum of magic. I looked at the rest of the study and found that a few symbols had been painted on the open floor space. The paint was dry, but little dust was around it. It couldn't have been much more than a day. I looked back at the book. Theodore said that this was just reconnaissance. I wasn't supposed to take anything, but there were too many panic-inducing what-ifs. I carefully looked through the notes, becoming more and more frustrated with my inexperience reading. I could not understand the messy scrawl on the paper. I picked up a few words, but not enough to make sense of them. I clenched my teeth and looked over the area again. I couldn't refuse an opportunity like this. I slipped the notes on the pages into the book, closing that up and tucking the tome into the front of my shirt. It made my rib cage vibrate. I shivered again and turned past the desk, but something made me stop. I turned back and knelt beside the symbols to scratch at the paint on the floor. The hair on the back of my neck prickled again, and I broke the line apart. Couldn't begin to explain my intentions, but it felt like the right thing to do. End chapter 1. Thanks for listening. I plan on doing every chapter, so make sure you subscribe, like, and follow to hear more.